When you're grading your students who need to put up a display or something, how do you grade them on their information?
This is a really good question. This is part of teaching that I haven't figured out is really how to grade papers. And part of this is easy. I mostly teach graduate students. Graduate students get A's in everything, so it's not that big a deal. But that's a cop-out to say that. The challenge there is how to grade the various aspects of their work. So you're right. There's a research part of it. Did they get that part right? You grade that. Is their project successful? That's another thing. How well did they do the process? How well did they work in a group? And ideally, you would give them good feedback on all of those areas. Do I do that well? Probably not. It would be good thing. It's hard to do it. I'm not sure I do it very well. But you don't just grade them on the final product. You would grade them on each of the parts of their work, I guess. Would be the right way to do that. But grading is hard. And to do it well, I've discovered another one of those things. It takes a long time to do grading well. But that's another story.
Can I ask you a quick question? It occurs to me that Providence and Philadelphia are similar in their diversity, right? Remarkably diverse populations. And one consistent problem, at least with public history, if you go to the annual meetings, you find that the field is not terribly diverse, certainly in terms of race and ethnicity and so forth. And so I wonder if you've had any luck, or you have a sense of how we can make our public humanities programs mirror the populations that they want to serve.
No, that's a really good question. I don't know that there's an easy answer. One thing that I learned at the Smithsonian was no matter how well-meaning I might be about getting communities of color into the museum, say, until there's a staff person who is part of that community there, it's really hard to do. Until you have somebody on the inside who can say, this is natural to me, these are people that this is sort of where I think about all the time. It's not the same as me saying, yes, we should add that on. And I learned that just by watching how other people work. It seems to me that one way you do that eventually is by, in graduate programs, finding ways to bring in a diverse group so that years out you have those folks in the museum. It's not easy to do. It's not an obvious thing. The other thing is by getting those communities involved in the projects all the time. I'll tell you a story because maybe people here can give me some advice. With my Museum of Anthropology hat on, I got a call a couple of weeks ago from the head of a group called the Native Americans of Rhode Island, which is a social service group that is basically provides job training to Native Americans in the 3 or 4 state area. And it turns out these are scattered all over the country, and there's federal money for this. And I met with him Monday, and he basically said, all right, my job is to provide social services and job training to young Native Americans. And you folks have a museum full of Native American cultural objects. What can you do for me? I want you to do something to help me in my job, using culture to help this population that is part of that culture and needs help. And I want to make an announcement in 2 weeks at our annual meeting. What can you do for me? I must admit, and he said, oh, by the way, we don't want any old stuff in here. It's just an old building. We can't put museum objects here. So what do? We have an answer.
Oh, no. Oh. Recording, I'm
sorry. Okay. I was hopeful there. And I actually talked about this with my students. We don't have an obvious answer. We've got lots of Native American stuff. We have the stuff these kids' great-great-great-grandparents would have seen as essential to their culture. They don't see it that way. One thought that we had was go work through art rather than history and say, You know, they teach classes in welding. Let's see if there's a way to do welding that is, you know, creates public art that is based on objects from the collection or something. We spend a lot of time thinking about ways of working through art to do history and do culture. But I don't know, it seems like the right question to ask. You've got our culture, we've got a needy population from that group, help us out. But I did not have an answer for it. And it was a very practical sort of question. Yeah.
I think the better bunch is to go back. I think 2 weeks is a little too short a time to go with. Is to go back to the person from the organization and say, what do you think we can do for you?
Right. Well, we had that long conversation with him. He really didn't know. I mean, his first thought was somehow what they're doing now is, turns out, and this is not something I'm an expert on, anti-smoking campaigns in the Native American community talk about culture a lot. So it's, you know, tobacco is a sacrament. You don't just smoke, you know, like other people do. There's interesting anti-alcoholism campaigns in the Native community that, you know, build on the culture. There are a variety of cultural programs that are designed to build basically pride through that jobs. So, you know, there are pictures of Sitting Bull up on the display saying, you know, this is part of your heritage. And that's good. It doesn't particularly take advantage of what museums can do. Like I say, I don't have an answer to this, but it does seem a wonderful public humanities question.
Have you considered oral history tie-ins, or, you know, that they would in fact, because I can think of it not only going forward but backwards, they could gain the oral histories and take them back to yet younger generations.
Oral history is really good. We do a lot of oral history work. Mostly, though, it's about reaching out to younger kids and sort of more understand your neighborhood. But yes, that's certainly something worth thinking about.
I think we have time for one more question. I saw him. Or Barbie, you can arm wrestle.
To what extent do you think that the comment that many talk about, that the past can serve as a compass for today and tomorrow? And to connect that question, what role do you see public history not playing in the political debates? You know, historically we think back to the Kennedy years and the great scholars were engaged in helping shape policy at the time and so forth. Going back to the early 19th century, much of that happened. And we don't hear that as much anymore. I wonder what you can say about that in public history today.
It's an interesting question. How do you use history to shape policy? One of the subfields of public history is a field called policy history, which a few years back was going strong. And I haven't noticed it nearly as much lately, but maybe just I'm not paying attention to it. So the idea was, you look at how policy is shaped, you look at what, and you learn from your mistakes, you learn from what you did well, and that helps you shape the political dialogue going forward. Our culture today does not seem particularly reflective in that way. The one place that does this, interestingly enough, is the military. The military really believes in history, both in a sort of cultural way, so everybody, all the cadets at West Point will, or in officer training school, will go to Gettysburg and walk the battlefield. Will do that kind of sort of cultural understanding of their past and learn from it. But they also will take seriously what should we learn from what we did wrong in the last campaign. So the place that has the best title of any public history program that I know of is the Army Center for Lessons Learned. I think it's a wonderful, practical way of picking up public history. What did we learn from our history? And they take this very seriously. The Army actually does very good history about trying not only to keep track of what they've done, but to learn from it. You would hope that academics and historians, and especially public historians, would play a role in campaigns, in government. It's not real obvious right now, but it's a goal to aim for.
Steve, thank you so much for speaking with us.